morning. I'm Liz Davis, a member of this congregation. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm excited to be leading this In Our Words service with you today. I've always enjoyed listening to This I Believe stories on NPR. They're modeled after a popular 1950s radio series of the same name that was hosted by Edward R. Murrow. Not one that I remember, but maybe some of you do. This, I believe, is now an international organization engaging people in writing and sharing essays, describing the core values that guide their daily lives. This year, the 7th grade English teacher at my school assigned a This, I Believe essay to her students. That inspired me to lead this service. I want to thank the members of our congregation who volunteered to participate and share their beliefs with us today. Rossi, Veronica, Laurie McMahon, and Barbie Laderman-Jones. For our Time for All Ages this morning, I'm going to share one of the This I Believe essays written by one of our 7th graders. When was the last time you took a risk or tried something new? It may seem like it's been a while, but it's probably more recent than you think. I've found that it's hard to enjoy my life if I stayed in my comfort zone. A risk doesn't need to be anything big. It's a risk to ask someone to be your friend, or to try something new if you're afraid you'll fail. Taking a risk or trying something new can be scary, but I believe that it's important to do it anyway. It can be something as little as trying a new food that you don't think you'll like. When I was little, my mom had a pack of turkey jerky and handed me a piece. I hadn't tried it before, but I'd already made up my mind that I wouldn't like it. After a while, she finally convinced me to try a bite, and I ended up liking it. After that, whenever I didn't want to try something new, whenever I was scared to take a risk, my family would say, "Remember the turkey jerky?" I would think back to that moment and really think about if it was worth it to take a risk. If I could get past just thinking about what could go wrong and instead focus on everything that could go right. A more recent example of this is when a friend asked me if I wanted to go to a summer camp with them. It would be for 2 weeks, and it was a sleepaway camp, meaning I would be in an entirely new place, away from my family for half a month. That would be the longest I had been away from my parents before. So initially, I was nervous. I wouldn't know anyone else there besides my one friend, and who knew if I would even have fun? What if something happened? I almost decided not to go. But then I thought about all of the good things that could happen. I might make some new friends. There would be so many new activities to try. We would sing campfire songs, make s'mores, do arts and crafts. I then realized that there were more good things that could happen than bad, so I agreed to go. And I'm so glad I did. I had so much fun. I tried a bunch of new things like water skiing and tubing, and I made new friends. Life is much more fun when you try new things, instead of just sticking to what you know you're good at. At many points in my life, I've been open to trying new things and taking risks, but at other times I've been too scared and too focused on what could go wrong, instead of what could go right. I think that people should be open to trying new things and shouldn't be afraid to take risks. This I believe. These are the words of a 7th grader from my school.
I want to thank Liz for inviting me to read today. First off, I should let you know that I love turkey jerky and I hate camping, so this is not going to be that kind of reflection. You should know about me that I'm 77 years old, okay? So I've seen a lot. What do I believe? As a kid, many voices told me what to believe. I can still hear a voice that sounds like Walter Cronkite reading the evening news, or like my father when he'd had too much to drink, or like my parish priest urging parishioners to support the war against communism. These days, he'd be railing against secularism, abortion, and non-binary ideas of gender. So what I believed back then was not a philosophical proposition. It was a matter of survival. My people, my tribe, believed with absolute assurance in their Christian God, their Catholic Church, and their American nation. I had to think along to get along. It was only after many years of schooling that I encountered thinkers like the Scottish philosopher David Hume, who argued that you can never know anything with certainty. In the meantime, I had been set on a path that would have led me into the forests of Vietnam, fearfully spraying the jungles with M16 bullets. 50,000 young Americans died in the forests and fields of Vietnam, millions of Vietnamese. These days, what I believe is very simple. I believe that we live in a material world. And also, coincidentally, that Madonna is a material girl. And I believe that this world of ours is subject to change, sometimes drastic change, but at all times change. And because things are always changing, there's always the possibility of danger and threat. We're not the only apex predator on the savanna. So as we've evolved from our tree-dwelling ancestors, we've developed strategies for mitigating risk and minimizing change. Western civilization is one such strategy. Technology is another. In a different time and place, the Roman Empire was such a strategy. We could list the rise and fall of many such strategies, all of them ultimately disappointing in one way or another. In one way or another, we all suffer and die. So what do? Alexander the Great, you might remember him, he conquered the world, the known world anyway, founding many cities named in his honor. He died at the age of 32. The Qin dynasty in China built a great wall to keep the nomads of Central Asia from invading their sedentary rice-planting empire. The nomads kept coming. Various of them became emperors of the China themselves. Of course, these days, only the Donald Trumps and Elon Musks among us have those kinds of opportunities. But most of the rest of us become parents or artists or insurance agents, all of which offer some small haven from human suffering. The Dalai Lama says, "My religion is kindness. My religion is kindness." I would say that even if you're not a saint, and who really wants to be Mother Teresa or Francis of Assisi, who even wants to be Pope Francis, that man's got a world of troubles to shoulder. You can still practice kindness. Day in, day out, kindness is always a possibility. I have a daughter who suffers from chronic fatigue syndrome. We didn't know that at first, her mother and I. At first being the first 10 years of steady deterioration in her mental and physical health. It was only last December that she finally got the CFS diagnosis. For a lot of that earlier time, I was a very bad parent. I thought she was shirking, gold-bricking, that all she had to do was make up her mind to get better. More exercise, I said. Eat better, I said. It's all in your head, I said. Well, I was wrong. And it took her mother, who is a lot more empathetic than I am, to point out my mistake. For a while, for a long time, my daughter and I were always arguing. "Why are you so mean?" she asked. And I'd say something stupid, something I'd learned from my own parents. "It's for your own good." Eventually, my wife got fed up with the frequent Donnybrooks and told me straight out, "You can't fix her. I don't know what can. You can only love her." These days, my daughter and I almost never fight. Sometimes I'll say something that will anger her, but usually we straighten it out pretty quick. In the meantime, I do the things she can't. I'm part Dobby, the kitchen elf from Harry Potter, you remember him? Or Brimsley, the Queen's manservant from Queen Charlotte. First thing I do when she gets up is get her coffee ready. Then I make her breakfast. After breakfast, I prepare a foot bath. She's had infections of both big toes for months. At noon, I fashion a very decorative vegetable plate for her, and then make the rest of her lunch. When she needs to see a doctor, I drive her. When she needs to return a headset to Best Buy, I take it back to the store. "Thank you, Dad," she says. "Thank you so very much." That's what I get, and that's all that I need. So, nearing my end, I am 77 after all. 67, oh, what a lovely year that was. So nearing my end, I seem to have found what works for me, what gives my life meaning and purpose, my answer to the suffering and frustration that are an unavoidable part of human life. I wish you similar success. What do I believe? I have spent much of my life shedding beliefs, belief in God, belief in country, belief in my ethnic identity. My answer would have to be something like, don't believe everything you're told. Although at times I might also say, don't believe anything you're told. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Veronica Palmer, and I have to say that over my existence of 75 years, like Lee and everybody else in this room and elsewhere, our experiences and beliefs change. And I have to come to say that my core belief today is that there were ETs that visited us in the ancient past and continue to visit us in the present. One of those ETs was Yahweh. And if we read the Old Testament, we discover that Yahweh was a jealous, angry God, ready to punish anybody for any infraction of any of his wishes or laws. Thank goodness Jesus came along and declared that in him the fulfillment of the scriptures, the ancient scriptures, had occurred, that he was a new covenant of love and spiritual harmony in the world. Unfortunately, our society has evolved under the guidance of Yahweh. And so, in that vein, I'd like to say that I believe the United States is on the verge of becoming a fascistic, totalitarian political entity. We now have a government that no longer serves the people, but only serves the wealthy and the corporations. Some financial, economic, and investment advisors that I listen to predict that Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, at the end of this month may announce a plan to implement the central bank's digital currency later this year. Some of these advisors believe that the sky is going to fall down and the earth is going to crack wide open. I don't particularly go along with that philosophy, but there are some downside risks. And one of them I'd like to elaborate on is the risk that our government can confiscate or freeze our financial accounts if the government considers any actions we take personally in protest to any policy they invoke. An example of this scenario is what Prime Minister of Canada Trudeau did to the Canadian truckers who protested their government's COVID mandates several months ago by freezing their accounts and the accounts of anybody that financially supported them. Next, another area of concern is that the United States government, through the CDC and other agencies, are working with the World Health Organization to develop and deploy a pandemic tracking system in the United States, the European Union, and other countries around the globe who allegedly will ratify and sign its global pandemic and health policy. The effect of all this is that dissent will be suppressed. People that refuse to comply will be unemployed, locked up, locked down, unable to use public services, unable to travel freely, denied public and private benefits, fined, and possibly imprisoned. Lastly, on this subject, I believe the cancel culture we are now experiencing is anti-free speech and opposed to dissent. Lastly, Dr. Gabor Mate, in his book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, maintains that over 4 decades of his practice, he's come to the conclusion that the modern concept of normal is false, with consequences on both our physical and mental health. I believe the trauma generally experienced by my generation and more recent generations is primarily, but not exclusively, due to the emotional abandonment syndrome and childhood violence. I believe one of the side effects, among others, of abandonment syndrome and violence is transgenderism. Male children feeling emotionally abandoned see girls being given what is perceived as attention and love. Girls see boys given attention and love for the boys' success in sports, academia, and social pursuits. Some children feeling deprived of love and seeing children of the opposite gender receiving what they are missing are going to find ways to satisfy that need. So today, as a transgender woman, I believe allowing children less than 20 years old to be given drugs for the purpose of suppressing puberty and suppressing puberty and harmful to their physical and mental health. I believe allowing children less than 20 years old to have gender-altering surgeries, which could potentially damage a child's physical and/or mental health and their social development in their future years. I believe allowing trans women to participate in sports opposite their birth gender subverts the purpose and intention of Title IX of the U.S. Code as it relates to women's rights, women's sports funding, and athletic recognition for women. Additionally, it puts genetic women at a competitive disadvantage. I believe children experience the trauma of the real world from the womb to their early adulthood and beyond. Every person has uncompromising need for the love and care in the womb and thereafter. We all experience the real world as it is for us. It is not surprising that so many attempt to find love and attention by changing their gender. Anyone, young or old, and with any ability to do so, who feels changing gender will provide that which they missed during their childhood or young adult existence will pursue it. From my perspective, which is uniquely my own, changing gender does not heal the wounds created early in life. In my maturity and experience, I really doubt that most transgender people feel like they are a girl or a boy born into the wrong body. What is felt is more like the other gender is getting what I need, and in today's world, I can medically transform myself to get it. As a society and in our own families, and I know that this is hard because we are the core of our child's experience, but we and our children are also affected by the value our culture places on each of us. We should be very attentive to the trauma behind our children's experience before providing the medical option of gender change. I am not a physical or mental health specialist, but for some time I have been searching for the cause of my own gender dysphoria. A great number of psychological books, papers, lectures, other transgender experiences bear witness to what is uniquely happening in America in such great numbers. If one later finds that the gender change does not provide the expected benefit and it was a mistake, it cannot be undone. Undergoing puberty-suppressing drugs will harm that child's ability to procreate in the future, even if they don't go all the way. Surgery once performed cannot be reversed. I do not doubt that some people can live well and be happy in their life as a transgendered man or woman. Mistake or not, it is generally and commonly a lonely world, as so many transgendered individuals later find out. Thank you for your attention.
After I graduated from college, I joined the Peace Corps and traveled to Papua New Guinea, where I taught science at a boarding school run by Christian missionaries. My Peace Corps service was life-changing in many ways. One is that it helped me solidify this core belief, that humans have an obligation to prevent suffering of animals and to do their best to relieve that suffering when it does occur. In Papua New Guinea, village dogs were typically neglected and often mistreated, and I was disturbed and saddened by their plight. Dogs were useful for guarding houses, but most locals were afraid of them and would throw rocks at them if they came too close. When families sent me care packages, I asked them to include dog biscuits so I could toss these to the dogs. I wanted to show them compassion and ease their suffering in whatever small way I could. I named one of these dogs Science Puppy because his favorite place to sleep was on the floor of the school's open-air science lab. And we do have a picture of Science Puppy that you can see briefly. Oh, did you already see it? Oh, okay. All right. One day, I saw that one of Science Puppy's legs was broken, reportedly because someone had thrown a rock at it. As I splinted his leg the best I could, I wasn't yet a veterinarian at the time, several students stepped in to help me restrain him. And months later, Science Puppy started peeing in his sleep. Suspecting a urinary tract infection, I got some antibiotics from the Mission Stations clinic, and I chased him down several times a day to medicate him. This time, students helped point me toward where I'd find him. They probably thought I was a bit wacky, but I'm proud to have shown them a concern for animals that they may not have witnessed before. Shortly after returning from the Peace Corps, I decided to go to veterinary school so that I could make helping animals my profession. I'd already been vegetarian since college, so no turkey jerky for me. But in vet school, as I learned how dairy cows and egg-laying hens were raised, I became a vegan. As a veterinarian, I've worked almost exclusively in the nonprofit sector with animals in shelters who have no one else to care for them. I'm blessed to have a career that I'm so passionate about because it's based on one of my core beliefs. If you'd spent the last few weeks with me, you'd have seen me put this belief in action a couple more times. While on vacation in South Carolina, I came across a fawn that had been hit by a car but was still alive. I picked it up from the middle of the road, laid it on the grass, made countless phone calls to locate the local wildlife agency, and shooed flies off its wounds while I waited over an hour for help to arrive. A couple weeks later, while visiting family in Idaho, I found a Canada goose that couldn't use one of its legs because fishing line had become tightly wrapped around the leg, strangulating it. I borrowed a net from a local wildlife rehabilitator, and while I lured the goose with popcorn, my husband Jason caught it in the net. We then wrapped it in a blanket and drove it to the rehabilitation center. In all, or at least most of these cases, humans had caused the suffering of these animals, and I did the best I could to ease their suffering. Humans should do their very best to avoid causing animals to suffer, and when animals do suffer, humans should do their very best to ease that suffering. This I believe.
I believe children should learn about the world, its people, its cultures, its geography. I believe learning about people different from us inspires empathy, and I believe developing empathy in children is a powerful and necessary step in the quest for peace. I am a proud, recently retired public elementary school teacher of over 3 decades. The year I switched from teaching primary to 5th grade, a study had just come out that found 5th graders in the US ranked among the lowest in their knowledge of world geography. Second to last, if I recall correctly. Well, that's going to change with my class, I thought, as I plastered a world map, US map, and California map on my walls. I prided myself that my students quickly learned that Africa is not a country, Alaska is part of the 50 states, and that there was once a land bridge over the Bering Strait. In October, we drew the world on real pumpkins, the equator, the prime meridian, continents, and oceans. We had weekly geography questions, and I encouraged them to look up the answers in the paperback atlases I'd given to each child. While I was proud that my kids were building their knowledge of world geography, I quickly learned it was even more important that they developed a curiosity about what it was like in those far-off and not so far-off lands. So we traveled. My students and I traveled to Pakistan, where they met Amal, a modern-day indentured servant. We traveled to Sudan to meet Salva, a boy fleeing the bombing in his village with others who would become known as the Lost Boys of Sudan. While in Sudan, we also met Naya, a girl who walked 8 hours each day to fetch water for her family. In Arizona, we met Avon, a delightfully strong girl who takes on the world in spite of being born without arms. We traveled from Arizona through Mexico and south into Guatemala with Angel, a Guatemalan immigrant who returned to Guatemala in part to discover the fate of his mother, who was a victim of the Guatemalan Civil War. We met Zitlali in Colorado, whose beloved, hard-working father was deported back to Oaxaca, Mexico, for driving without a license. And we fell in love with 11-year-old Melody in Ohio, born with cerebral palsy, unable to talk, who through perseverance and the love of friends and family finds a voice. We traveled back in time to meet Kit, accused of witchcraft in her Connecticut colony. We met 10-year-old Anna Marie in Denmark, who with her family helped Jews escape to Sweden during the Holocaust. And we met 8-year-old Aki Munemitsu, who was imprisoned with her family in a Japanese internment camp during World War II, and 9-year-old Sylvia Mendez, whose exclusion from the local public school was the impetus for Mendez versus Westminster, the landmark desegregation case of 1946. We formed bonds with young slaves who turned spies during the Revolutionary War, slaves escaping on the Underground Railroad, and countless other people, most of whom experienced great tragedies only to emerge stronger. I think it's fair to say that with all my classes, a favorite time of the day was when I read aloud to them. A few years ago in June, my students and I were sharing beloved memories from the year. Lizbeth, said her favorite memory was when, quote, Miss McMahon was reading to us and we were so into the story that she continued reading all through math. It's a good day when I didn't have to teach math. A good book, read well, allows children to become engrossed in the story being told. They bond with the characters, even identify with them, which helps them develop empathy, seeing the world through the character's perspective. In NPR's Ari Shapiro's new memoir, he talks about reading fiction and says, quote, if you can enter into the world, if you can connect with the character, what else does that do but make connections? In this time of mutual distrust and tribalism, we have few incentives to reach across divides, and then we pick up a book and see the world through someone else's eyes. I believe in the power of books to teach children about the world. Whether these students I've taught go on to travel the world or not, the places they visited in stories, and the people they met along the way, the lessons learned will stay with them and help to form who they are and how they move through their world. Thank you.
When I was young, I was definitely a perfectionist, a high achiever. I wanted to be excellent at everything I did, and if I felt I couldn't excel, I often wouldn't try. Then came parenthood. I read every book I could. I learned about schedules and breastfeeding and sleep training. But my son had other ideas about when he would sleep and how much he would eat. My husband, Rob, ended up hiding the books from me. And I finally let go of doing things the best way. I settled for good enough. I learned to trust that I was doing my best and that my kids would be okay. I set the bar low. And every day we got through alive, I counted as a success. Learning to let go of perfection, of having to be the best, allowed me to try new things, to take chances, and to fail. When I had the idea for this service, I didn't let being perfect get in my way. I decided to go for it and trusted that it would be good enough. I hope you agree. Being good enough set me free. This I believe.